Hi, I'm Caroline Mitchell, canine behaviourist at Good Doggy. So behaviour sequences are pretty powerful things when it comes to dog training and behaviour. Dogs recognise them really quickly and they use them to predict outcomes, whether that's good or bad. In this video, I'm going to talk about what they are, how you can use them to create or solve anxiety, why you need to identify them, and how you can use them to change your dog's behaviour. And in particular, I'm going to use a few examples. I'm going to talk about a dog that refuses to get in the car, separation anxiety, recall fails, reactive behaviour, and answering the door. These are just a few examples we'll go through, but the whole principle can be applied to pretty much any kind of similar behaviour. So let's start with what is a behaviour sequence. So a behaviour sequence is a series of behaviours or steps that lead to something. So if I decided to ring a bell every time I took my dog for a walk, the bell will quickly become part of the going for a walk sequence. The dog will know the bell comes before the walk, so he will connect those two things together. If I decided to add watching EastEnders before I rang the bell, then the dum-dums at the end of EastEnders would then also become a part of the sequence. If I decided to slap my knees before I got up, that would become a part of the sequence. Maybe I would add putting a cup in the sink, shouting up the stairs to tell my family I'm leaving, putting my shoes on, and so on. And if you do the same sequence pretty much in the same order often enough, your dog will start to connect all of those things together. And as soon as the very first part of the sequence happens, your dog will immediately start to expect to walk because he knows where the sequence is going. So in this sequence then, the minute I sat down to watch EastEnders, my dog is already thinking, I'm going to be going for a walk in a minute. All I have to wait for is the dum-dums, the knee slap, the cup going in the sink, shouting up the stairs to say I'm taking the dog for a WALK, ringing the bell and putting the lead on. So as soon as I sit down for EastEnders, my dog is already in walk mode. When this sequence is repeated often enough, the steps in the sequence become as powerful as an event. So we can see that. So in that particular situation, I would sit down for EastEnders. Your dog's thinking, I'm going to go for a walk in a minute. And already that's triggered that super excited feeling that he gets from going for a walk. For most dogs, things like doorbells, smells, lead, coming out, even learning a sequence of left and right turns in the car, and even waking up can form a part of a behaviour sequence. Some sequences lead to a positive reaction, like, for example, in that walk. So in the example above there, as soon as the dog had recognised one of the steps in the sequence, he's going to start to get happy and excited. The more steps he recognises, the further down the sequence you get, the more excited he gets. This is trigger stacking. So a particularly calm experience that many dogs will recognise is their bedtime routine. Not all of these sequences end up with exciting events at the end. So in this routine, your dog is going to eventually end up in bed. So at the end of the night, you're putting the cups away, you're turning the lights off, you're going out for the last pee of the day. You maybe even use a bedtime phrase like, will we head to bed now, or something like that. All of these things become a sequence which triggers a different emotion here, hopefully. Hopefully this is calming routine for your dog and he starts to recognise these things and starts to wind down, ready to go to bed. Not all sequences lead to nice things at the end. Some sequences have a bad outcome and can trigger anxiety. So a dog that has anxiety about a particular situation may identify a set of sequences, a behaviour sequence that leads to something they don't like. So for your dog, maybe the car might be a source of anxiety for your dog. He might resist getting in the car. So if your dog can identify a sequence of behaviour that leads towards getting in the car that's maybe different from just going for a normal walk, then this will start to trigger that anxiety. So perhaps your dog has a special harness for the car, or maybe you pick up a different set of keys when you go in the car. Perhaps you use a different shoes or a coat, or maybe you pick up a long line rather than just taking the normal lead. Anything you do that's different to going just for a normal walk, your dog will recognise that. That will then become his series of sequences that lead to the anxiety of getting in the car. So these events in this behaviour sequence are now going to start triggering that anxiety of getting in the car, and he will start to resist those too. So this is how behaviour can kind of grow and spread and get out of hand. In the first instance, the dog didn't want to go in the car, so he would have put his brakes on at the exact moment he realised that was happening. When this started, he wouldn't have done that until actually he was probably right beside the car and you had even just opened the boot. But as time went on, he learned the pattern, he learned the sequence that led there, and now every step in that sequence now, he is resisting because that is all associated with going in the car. Separation anxiety is another example of a behaviour sequence, a series of triggers that all lead to something your dog doesn't like. So dogs that have separation anxiety often notice these sequences and associate all of the steps in those with being alone. Perhaps their routine includes going to their bed or putting on a special set of shoes. Maybe they get their Kong toy. Perhaps they've been told to watch the house or back in a mow. Specific doors may get closed. Maybe they get taken out to the toilet. Perhaps you've started packing your lunch and so on. So all of those steps that are associated with you leaving him, these will be different steps to the ones that you use when you take him for a walk. So he will quickly identify the difference between these two. But once that sequence has been initiated, that anxiety will have already been triggered. So he will then again start to take steps to try and avoid that situation from happening. With separation anxiety, that's quite a powerful anxiety. Loneliness is a really strong emotion. But once it's been triggered, it's very hard for that to come back to. So solving separation anxiety related problems often starts with identifying all of the steps in this sequence and working on them, or creating a brand new set of sequences that your dog has not associated with being left on their own. So let's talk about what happens when you try to change a sequence that's already in place. So when you have a sequence in place, you may try to switch in and out different steps to get a different effect. So a really common example that people will try is they will swap the word walk for W-A-L-K, because our dog quickly learns that the word walk is connected to going for a walk. He's identified that as a part of the going for a walk sequence. So when we change it to W-A-L-K, what happens is our dog is confused. He doesn't know what that sound is that we've just made. He doesn't know how to spell walk. He doesn't know how to spell anything. So initially that will stop triggering that emotion because the word walk was originally in the sequence, but we've switched that out and we've now decided to replace it with W-A-L-K. So maybe you're sitting in the chair and you're just saying to your partner, do you think we should take the dog for a W-A-L-K? Initially, your dog won't respond to that. He won't react to that because he doesn't know what it means. But when you start using it in the old sequence, if you don't change anything else in that sequence, it quickly just gets slotted back in again, and everything else is the same. So it will just get absorbed straight into that sequence. And before you know it, saying W-A-L-K will now trigger the same reaction as walk did. So your dog is now getting super excited every time you try and spell the word walk. Your dog did not learn to spell. He just knew the sequence that surrounded the original word walk, and the sequence didn't change. So the new way of doing it has now just been absorbed into that. People often do this with the doorbell as well. They know that the doorbell triggers a response from their dog, so maybe they change the doorbell to a different sound or a different tone, buy a new doorbell, or perhaps they turn it off and just ask people to knock the door instead. Maybe sometimes people will ask people to text them when they've arrived. But again, if nothing else changes around that sequence, then that new sound, that new trigger will quickly get absorbed into it and will start triggering the rest of it the same. So sometimes there is value in trying to desensitize a dog to one of the steps in an old routine, but you have to change the routine around it enough that it feels like a new routine so that your dog can learn a new behavior and a new response to all of the new steps. If you don't change anything else, then this one will just quickly go into that and everything will just go back to the way it was, and you'll be back to where you started. If you decide to do this, you'll need to change probably more than half of the routine for it to feel like it's new. In an example of a recall, we talk about using long lines. So when you initially teach your dog a recall, you'll teach them on a short lead, then you'll let them go onto a medium lead and eventually a long lead before you let them completely off the lead. And you'll test your recall at different stages, or hopefully you will. When you get to the long lead, people often say, but what happens when I take the lead away? My dog will know they're not on a lead and therefore it won't be the same. But just the same as the doorbell routine and saying W-A-L-K, was only one change in a whole sequence of behavior, as long as you keep doing everything the same with your recall and it's only the lead that's changed, that sequence will still continue to trigger the same end result. So with your recall, your dog will be on a long lead, but the steps hopefully will be similar. So look at the steps that you use when you do a recall. I always tell people to keep them exactly the same. So this is how you create the sequence and make it work for you. So perhaps you put your hand in your pocket first, you get your treat out, then you hold it in front of you, then you say your dog's name, then you tell them what they want, and then you put the treat down by your knee and your dog runs over and he takes the treat and he gets a good boy. It's a small sequence, doesn't have to be long, it doesn't have to be complicated, but if you follow the same steps every single time, so pocket, treat, say his name, tell him what to do, hold your treat down for him to come and get it, then that sequence will remain the same every single time. So eventually it won't matter whether he has a long lead or not. You're only just changing one tiny little bit, but everything else around that has still remained the same, and he will still come back to you to get his treat because that's what happens next in the sequence. Sometimes though, making changes to an old sequence is not the right answer. Sometimes you can't identify an old sequence. Maybe you're not able to spot any kind of patterns. So in this case, we maybe just start with a brand new one. You might do this if you want to create a consistent outcome in a situation that is not currently consistent. This happens a lot in reactive behaviour, that some people will say to me that their dog reacts in one way for one type of dog and one way for another, and different situations. Sometimes it's a big reaction, sometimes it's small, sometimes they don't do anything at all. So when you're trying to create a consistent outcome, making a new sequence of your own can be really helpful. So just like I mentioned in the recall example, you can include things like going to your pocket, getting a treat out, you can use a clicker, you can use some keywords in there. So you could perhaps, let's say you get your clicker out as soon as you see a dog, and you start clicking and you say, "It's okay, Barney, just keep walking." And then you make some space, you've got the treat coming out of the pocket. All of those kinds of things can become a sequence that your dog will recognize. So when you've become very consistent with that sequence, then he can become more consistent with his response in those situations. So there's one example of why you might want to do that. But in either case, what you need to do is you need to make your new sequence lead to a goal. So that reactive dog, when a dog is reactive towards other dogs, the main goal of that behavior is to make them feel safe. So whatever happens, you have to keep it nice and low key. You have to manage your situation, manage your proximity to the other dog so that the result is a nice calm and it ends very, very well with your dog feeling safe. But it avoids that middle part where he barks and shouts and lunges and all that kind of stuff. In separation anxiety, which is another example of a sequence that you can use to help solve anxiety, again, you need to lead to safety. You can't allow your dog to have an anxious moment in the middle of that sequence, because then the new sequence will become associated with anxiety as well. So with separation anxiety, what you want to try and do is create a routine that your dog can cope with. And this might mean that you don't even leave the house initially. So you're going to create a new routine, which is different from the old one, but is useful still. So maybe you will start with a different sound. Maybe you'll tell your dog it's time to go out. Perhaps you'll take him to his spot. You'll ask him to sit. Maybe you didn't do that before. Maybe you'll produce a blanket for him to lie on that's not normally there. You'll put that down. So these things feel different to him. So he knows that something different is happening to what used to happen. This is something brand new, and it makes him feel kind of interested, and he'll stay kind of curious about what's happening. So you do enough of these steps. Maybe you pick your coat up but don't put it on. Perhaps you pick your shoes up but don't put those on until you've walked out the door. And then you're just going to walk to the door, you're going to touch the handle, and then you're just going to undo them all. So when you've repeated that over and over and over again, and it does require a lot of repetition, you'll just do your routine, you'll go forwards and backwards and forwards and backwards and forwards and backwards, and your dog will start to realize that this routine doesn't really mean anything. It's not very exciting. Nothing good or bad happens at the end of it. And those steps will start to be associated with safety, because at the end of the day, he was safe. He felt safe. He didn't feel concerned at all. And then you can start thinking about opening and closing the door, leaving the house, stretching the time, etc. Very often people start with separation anxiety. They start trying to go, well, let's start with 5 minutes on their own and see if we can build from there. You need to roll all the way back to that sequence of events that led to being left on their own, and you need to correct that so that it feels safe for your dog. I've already mentioned using a clicker with the reactive dog. Using a clicker can be a really good way of adding a new step into a behaviour sequence. When you introduce the clicker on its own, it creates a mini sequence that can make your dog feel good. When you've introduced the clicker to your dog at home, you will have given the dog lots and lots of treats and clicks at the same time. So your dog already knows that a click is a good thing. So we've already taught the dog that the click ends in a safe and happy feeling. So then we can introduce this to a routine and add a really positive outcome, as long as we can control everything else and make it easy for them. You could also introduce this into a sequence of getting your dog towards the car door, for example. So maybe you start approaching the car from the roadside rather than the house. This will feel different. And as you walk the final few feet towards the house, while he's coping well, he's not suspicious at all, you can start using your clicker and head towards the car. Maybe initially you just want to kind of stop near the car. You just want to get him used to walking beside the car or around the car. So you can use your clicker again as a part of that sequence. So you start as you approach, you click, 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 walk towards the car, and then you can just kind of leave at the last minute. The clicker has made its own sequence, which has been slotted into this one. You've come from a different direction. You've done something very different. So your dog is not immediately going, this is about the car and I'm going to be resistant to it. So once he starts to realize he can cope with these small steps, then you can start adding other things back into the routine. So maybe you can just slot one thing in. We already know that putting one thing into a routine doesn't really change the outcome of it, because everything else is too powerful around it. So if now you want to put your dog's car harness on in the middle of that routine, again, it would be kind of out of place. Normally he gets it on first. Now it's come into the middle. But if everything else remains the same, then you'll quickly just slip back into this routine of feeling safe, and you can start to build on that. So that's maybe how you introduce it into getting him into a car. Of course, there's lots of different ways to do all of these things. These are just some suggestions about how this kind of works. I really hope you're getting lots of useful hints and tips and ideas from watching the videos here on my YouTube channel. Behaviour training, though, is a complex thing, and there are so many variables and options and different ways to approach things. And sometimes working on it alone can feel quite lonely and frustrating at times. Sometimes you'll question whether you're doing the right thing or whether you might even be making things worse. If this is you, don't worry, I'm here for you. Privately, I can guide you through and support you through the process wherever you are. We'll start with an assessment session where I'll get to know your dog. I'll get to learn what makes him tick, any history. We'll learn about the behaviours you need help with. And then once we've figured out what's gone wrong and what techniques will suit him best, we'll make a plan just for him. Then we'll follow up with a series of private sessions where we'll address the root cause, work on related behaviours, boost resilience, and build on the behaviour training plan together until you have something that is working for you both. If that's something that's of interest to you, please check out the information on this video for details about how to get in touch and how to find out more about how I can navigate you through this process. So if you want to change a behaviour, you have to learn that all behaviour is part of a sequence. Maybe it's just one step or two steps, like when the doorbell goes or a car arrives on the drive, or it could be very multi-layered and complex. Whatever it is, we've got to identify that first and the behaviour that we want to change, and then we can change as much of that as possible until the end result leads to where we want it to be. We can start to build a new behaviour sequence from there, and we'll start to change habits because we've changed enough of it that the dog will learn a new response to all of those steps, and you'll get the new behaviour that you want. So answering the front door, what might a sequence look like for this? So perhaps it starts with the gate creaking. Maybe there's footsteps that approach the door, then the doorbell goes, you get up. Perhaps you shout at the dog, or maybe you shout at somebody else to answer the door. Now you're in a hurry because the doorbell's gone, so you're rushing to the front door. Maybe you're arguing with somebody or the dog again. You're trying to get the dog into another room, and then the door opens and a visit appears. This sequence is very similar to the one where the postman delivers mail. It's close enough to it that it will get the same response, even though the postman doesn't come in. a lot of the steps are the same. We'll still get the gate creaking, we'll still get the footsteps, we'll still get the person coming towards the door, the rushing, the shouting, all of that is similar. So it won't take very long before the dog goes, right, the postman routine and the people coming to the front door routine are both basically the same. So what about if we changed it and did it like this? So the gate creaks, footsteps are coming up, the doorbell, obviously it's the same so far, you can see that. But what about now if we change it and you get up slowly? What if you use a calm tone instead of shouting and you thank the dog nicely? Then you walk slowly to the kitchen to get your treat and clicker. Previously you rushed to the front door, so this is already feeling very different. Then you're going to ask your dog to sit. You're going to use your clicker while you walk to the door and invite your guest in. A lot of this has changed. You might even decide at this point to change your doorbell completely as well, just like we mentioned earlier. Because you've changed enough of the sequence, then the new doorbell, the new trigger becomes a part of this sequence and the old doorbell can remain a part of the old sequence. So he's learning a whole new behaviour with a whole new set of triggers. This is quite a lot to tackle in one go. So maybe with the front door, we stop with the front part, we just go straight to the middle. Once he's got the idea of doing the sit while you walk to and from the door, then you can start adding steps on at the front and back. So eventually it looks like what I've just described and it actually becomes useful. And when it can be done like that, that's when you can start actually using it to answer your door. But starting in the middle of any sequence, just teaching the middle part is often quite a good idea, especially if the front part hasn't changed very much. So when you have created your new behaviour sequence, you've decided what you want, then start practicing on the middle bit and then add front and back until eventually you can rehearse this and practice this in a real life situation with all of the steps required. Recall. So the current sequence might be I'm walking in the park, I shout for the dog is playing with friends, he continues to play with friends. Eventually he might give up and calm. You've shouted at him 16 times. Then he gets told off. You didn't get a treat. So in this scenario, the recall has led to getting told off and no fun. What about this instead? You're standing still. You've got your hand in your pocket. The treat comes out. Dog gets called. He's on his long line. So play stops straight away because you have the power to do that. This is different now. So you can use your line to interrupt that play and help him come to you. He returns to his owner, he gets lots of praise, his treat is waiting, and then the big different thing at the end is that you send him back to play. So in this second way of doing it, recall now leads to praise, treats, and more play. So this second behaviour sequence is going to be much more preferred to the old one once you've practiced and rehearsed it enough times that he's realised that this is a sequence and it's always going to end this way. In reactive behaviour, how do we use the trick? We can use a clicker in here. We can identify the sequence. So the sequence for reactive behaviour is your dog will see a dog in the distance. You will walk towards it. Your dog probably will try and move away. The lead will get tightened. You'll get closer. He gets overwhelmed, barks and lunges. The other dog goes away. Your dog feels safe. Now your dog relaxes. But how about this instead? You see a dog in the distance. You start using your clicker. The treat comes out. Then you walk away with the owner. You get loads more clicks, gets a treat, still feels safe. Once you've practiced and rehearsed this routine a lot at that distance, then this will become a new behaviour sequence. And again, you can start to build on it. So you don't have to be so far away in the future. You'll be able to move closer and closer. The rest of the sequence will remain the same. The only thing that is going to change in the new routine is the distance. And that we already know we can change one thing in a routine without it affecting the rest of it. And that's basically just how these behaviour sequences work and what you can do with them, some examples. I'd love to hear what sequences you can spot in your own dog's behaviour and into their routine. And if you've got any thoughts or questions, then head to the comments. And I'll see you soon. Take care for now. Bye-bye.